If you heard someone knock at your door in the middle of the night, and when you opened it, they whispered your name, would you still believe you were alone? I was never a believer in ghosts. That's why when my cousin offered me a month-long stay in his countryside house while he traveled abroad, I accepted without hesitation. A quiet place, away from the city noise, sounded like exactly what I needed to finish my book. The house stood at the edge of an abandoned logging road, surrounded by pine trees that swayed in the wind like they were whispering secrets. It was the kind of place you might see on a postcard, until you noticed the scratches. Long, deep, claw-like grooves etched into the wooden front door, as though something had tried to get inside, or out. When I asked my cousin about it, he just laughed awkwardly. You'll hear some noises at night. It's just the old wood creaking. Don't overthink it. That night, I unpacked my things, made tea, and sat by the fireplace with my laptop. The wind howled outside. The floorboards popped. Old house sounds. Nothing unusual. By 1 a.m., I was still typing, and that's when I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. 3 deliberate knocks. Not the sound of wind or branches. This was human. I froze. Who would be out here at this hour? When I peered through the peephole, the porch was empty. The road beyond was dark, no headlights, no figures. I waited a moment, then turned away. Knock, knock, knock. This time the sound came from the back door. My skin prickled. I hadn't even been in the kitchen yet, and now there was someone or something moving around the house. Grabbing my phone, I dialed my cousin, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried the local sheriff's number from a faded emergency card stuck to the fridge. The line rang and rang and rang, no answer. I decided to check the back door, thinking maybe it was just a raccoon or some animal. I flipped on the light. The porch was empty. The woods beyond were a black wall of pine. I exhaled, locking the door again, and turned to go back to the living room. That's when I heard it. A voice. Faint, like a whisper carried on the wind. Ethan. My heart jumped. Nobody here knew my name. Nobody. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been a dream. Maybe I dozed off in front of the fire, half hearing the creaks of the house. I went outside to clear my head and found something in the frost-dusted grass. Footprints. Bare feet. Small, like those of a child. They led from the edge of the woods right up to my front porch, and then stopped. No return prints, no signs of running away. Just gone. That night, the knocking returned, but this time, it came from inside the house. It was almost 3:17 a.m. when I woke up to the sound. Soft, patient knocks, like someone tapping on a wall just above my head. My bedroom was upstairs. The only thing above me was the attic. I told myself it was just loose boards shifting in the wind. Except, there was no wind that night. I got up, grabbed the flashlight, and climbed the narrow attic steps. The air up there was freezing, each breath turning into a faint mist. My light scanned over old furniture, stacks of boxes, dust hanging in the beam. Then I saw it. In the far corner of the attic was an old wooden door I hadn't noticed before. It was smaller than a regular door, barely big enough for a child to crawl through. The wood was warped, the paint peeling, and carved into the center, deep, jagged letters, was my name. Not painted, not written with chalk, carved. I backed away so fast I nearly tripped on a box. The knocking started again, this time from behind that small door. I ran downstairs and locked myself in my bedroom. I didn't sleep a second. By the third night, I was a mess. My hands shook when I made coffee. I jumped at the sound of my own footsteps. At 2 a.m., I was sitting at the kitchen table, watching the clock, waiting for it to happen again. But instead of knocking, something else happened. The lights flickered. The front door unlocked itself with a loud click. I rushed over and twisted the bolt shut again, but the second I stepped back, click, it unlocked itself. I pressed my ear to the door. Silence. Then, "Let me in, Ethan." The voice was closer now, right on the other side of the wood. I grabbed a chair, wedged it under the door handle, and stumbled backward, straight into the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate, coming down from the attic. Except the attic door was still locked. I had locked it myself. The footsteps stopped at the bottom of the stairs. I didn't dare breathe. Then something scraped across the floor, like fingernails dragging along the wall. My flashlight beam caught a shadow moving across the hallway. Too tall to be a child, too thin to be a man. It stopped in the middle of the hall, as if it knew I was watching. Then, in the darkness, I heard it whisper again. "You're already inside my house." I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my back against the kitchen wall, clutching the flashlight until sunrise. When the light finally broke through the trees, I decided I couldn't stay here another night. But when I opened the front door to leave, I froze. The bare footprints were back. Only this time, they didn't start from the woods. They started from inside the house and led out into the forest. Cliffhanger ending for part 1. I packed a small bag and followed those footprints, determined to find out where they led. I wish I could tell you I was ready for what I saw at the end of that trail, but the truth is, no one is ready to see their own body lying in the snow. The body lay face up in the snow, pale and stiff, eyes wide open. The worst part? The face staring back at me was mine. Same hair, same scar above the eyebrow from when I fell off my bike as a kid, same faint stubble. Even the clothes were identical to what I was wearing at that exact moment. I wanted to scream, but my throat locked up. My breath came out in sharp, white bursts, and for a long moment, the only sound in the forest was the faint rustle of pine needles in the cold wind. I reached out with a shaking hand, almost touching the frozen cheek of whatever this was. The skin looked too real, too detailed to be some kind of mannequin or prank. Then I noticed something else. Its mouth was open, like it had died mid-breath. Inside was a small black object. I bent closer. It was a key. Every instinct told me to run, but I pulled the key from its mouth anyway, wiping off the frost. It was old, iron, with a strange symbol carved into the bow. A spiral that seemed to move the longer I looked at it. I stood, looking around. The footprints that had led me here stopped right at the body. There were no other tracks leaving, as if whoever, or whatever, brought it here had vanished into thin air. That's when I felt it. The air shifted. Cold, but not like the winter wind. This was the kind of cold that seemed to crawl under your skin. Somewhere deeper in the forest, I heard a voice call my name. Not a whisper this time, but clear, distant, almost melodic. Ethan. It wasn't coming from the direction of the house. It was coming from the opposite way, deeper into the trees. I should have gone back. I should have gotten in my car and driven until I couldn't see those pines anymore. But instead, I followed the voice. The forest closed the farther I went. The pines leaned overhead, blotting out the weak sunlight. I walked for what felt like hours until I came to a clearing. In the center was something that didn't belong, a door frame, no walls, no roof. Just an old, weathered wooden door standing upright in the snow, with nothing holding it up. Its surface was scratched and splintered, and hanging from the knob was a tag. The tag read, "Only the one who remembers may enter." I pulled the iron key from my pocket. It fit perfectly into the lock. The door swung open, not into the forest, but into darkness. Not just dark, complete black. No trees, no snow, no ground, just an endless void. And faintly, from somewhere inside that blackness, I heard something moving. I don't know how long I stood there before I shut the door again. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the key. When I turned back toward the trail, the forest was gone. In its place was a hallway. Old wallpaper peeled from the walls, curling like dead leaves. The floor was warped wood, each step groaning under my weight. Faint light spilled from a single bulb swinging overhead. And at the far end of the hallway, was the small attic door from my cousin's house. I walked toward it, each step heavier than the last. I didn't want to open it, but I couldn't stop myself. My hand reached out, fingers brushing the wood, still carved with my name. From inside came the same knocking I'd heard nights before. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, and then a voice. Not a whisper, but right up against the wood. "You're not supposed to be here yet." The door burst open. I woke up lying in my bed at the house, gasping for breath. My clothes were damp with melted snow. The iron key was still in my hand. I stumbled into the bathroom, splashing water on my face, trying to convince myself it was a nightmare. But when I looked up into the mirror, my stomach turned to ice. The reflection was off. It was me, but the reflection's lips moved a fraction slower than mine. And then, without me opening my mouth at all, the reflection said, "Don't leave. You're almost ready." I backed away, tripping over the bath mat. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was my cousin calling. Relieved, I answered immediately. "Thank God you have no idea what's been happening here." But it wasn't my cousin's voice. It was mine. "You should have stayed out of the forest." The line went dead. The next day, I tried to leave for real. I packed my bag, grabbed the car keys, and shoved the iron key into my pocket without even thinking. When I reached the road, the pines loomed taller than before, like they'd grown overnight. Snow crunched under my boots as I walked to where my car was parked. Only, it wasn't there. In its place was the same old doorframe from the forest clearing, the one with no walls. This time, the tag was gone. The knocking started again, 3 sharp raps from somewhere behind me. I turned, expecting the house to be far away, but it wasn't. It was right there, closer than it should be, almost breathing. The windows reflected nothing. The chimney released no smoke. And I could swear the front door was a little wider than before, as if it were waiting for me to step closer. And above it, carved into the wood in letters big enough to see from the road, was my name. I should have run. I should have screamed. But something about seeing my name carved into that door made my legs move forward on their own. The last thing I remember before everything went black was stepping over the threshold. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the living room of my cousin's house. I was in a bedroom I'd never seen before. The walls were pale green, faded, and water-stained in places. The curtains hung motionless, even though I could hear wind outside. A single lamp sat on a dresser, casting a warm glow that felt wrong. Too warm, like it was trying too hard to be comforting. I sat up slowly. My bag was gone. My phone was gone. But the iron key was still in my pocket, as if it had been there all my life. From the corner of the room, a music box began to play. The melody was familiar, but I couldn't place it. Soft, almost childlike, but with notes that seemed to slip out of tune, like it was remembering a song wrong. The lid was closed, but the sound was coming from inside it anyway. I hesitated, then lifted the lid. Inside was a photograph. It was old, edges frayed, colors faded. It showed me as a child, no older than 10, standing in front of this exact bedroom. My arms were around a girl with dark hair and pale skin who smiled like she knew a secret. On the back, written in neat, slanted handwriting, were the words, "Don't forget me this time." My skin went cold. I didn't remember this place. I didn't remember this girl. And yet, I felt something deep in my chest, like I'd known her once, like I'd promised something to her. Before I could think more, the lamp flickered. Then the doorknob rattled. Knock, knock, knock. I stepped back, clutching the key. The knocks grew louder, sharper, faster, until the door swung open on its own. The hallway outside wasn't the hallway I knew. It was long, too long, lined with doors on each side. Every door had a name carved into it. Some were names I didn't recognize, but as I moved down the hall, I saw one that made my blood run cold. Ethan Cole. My name. The door was slightly ajar. From inside came a faint sound, breathing. Slow, steady, but with a rasp, like whoever it belonged to had been breathing for far too long without stopping. I pushed the door open. The room inside was almost empty, except for a chair in the middle. Sitting in it was me. Not frozen in snow like before, not dead, alive, eyes open, watching me. But this version of me was wrong. The skin around the eyes was dark and sunken, lips cracked, and the smile that spread across its face was too wide to be human. "You're getting closer," it said, voice trembling with excitement. I stumbled back. Closer to what? The remembering. Before I could speak again, the lamp in the corner flickered and went out. The room was swallowed by darkness. When the light came back, the chair was empty. The air felt heavier now. Every breath was a struggle. I staggered into the hallway again, but the doors were gone. Just a long, featureless stretch of wall. At the far end was a staircase leading down. Something in me didn't want to go down those stairs, but I did. The staircase ended in what looked like a basement. The smell of damp earth and something metallic, like blood, hung in the air. Faint light filtered in from a single swinging bulb overhead. In the center of the room was a mirror. Not a small one. A full-length, old-fashioned standing mirror with a wooden frame. The glass was foggy, like it had been breathing. I stepped closer. My reflection stood there, but it wasn't moving the way I was. I raised my hand. My reflection didn't. I tilted my head. It stared straight ahead. Then it reached out, pressing its palm against the inside of the glass. The surface rippled like water. "Let me in," it whispered. I stumbled back, but the reflection kept pressing until its hand broke through the glass, shards falling soundlessly to the floor. Its fingers wrapped around my wrist, ice cold, gripping so hard I felt the bones shift. It began pulling me toward the mirror, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't break free. Just as my face was about to touch the surface, I remembered the iron key in my pocket. Desperation made me jab it toward the reflection's chest. The moment the key touched it, the glass shattered completely. I fell to the floor, coughing. When I looked up, the mirror was gone. In its place was the small attic door again. This time I didn't run. I crawled toward it, pressing my ear to the wood. Silence. Then, faintly, "Ethan, you left me here." The voice wasn't mine. It was the girl from the photograph. Before I could react, the door creaked open on its own. A wave of freezing air spilled out, smelling faintly of pine and something older, like dust that had been trapped for decades. Inside, there was no attic. There was a forest. The same forest from outside the house, but wrong. Colors too muted, shadows too deep. And standing among the trees was the girl. She was barefoot in the snow, wearing a thin white dress that should have left her shivering, but she stood still, smiling faintly. "You came back," she said. I stepped through the doorway, and the cold hit me like a wall. "Who are you?" I asked. "You know who I am." "I don't. I've never." She tilted her head. "You promised. You promised you wouldn't leave me here again." I opened my mouth to deny it, but something inside me twisted. Flashes, quick, painful, rushed through my head. A younger me holding her hand, running through the forest, a door closing, her voice screaming my name. I staggered back, clutching my head. "I don't remember." Her smile faded. "That's the problem." Behind her, the forest began to move, not the trees, but the shadows between them, rising like smoke and taking shape. Figures, dozens of them, barefoot with sunken eyes, all watching me. She stepped closer. "If you don't remember soon, you'll stay here, like them." One of the shadow figures broke away from the rest, stepping into the dim light. It was me. Again. And he smiled like he'd been waiting a very long time. The shadow version of me stepped closer, each movement deliberate, like a predator in no rush to strike. His eyes locked on mine, not hateful, not angry, but knowing. The girl didn't move. She just watched us, her expression unreadable, as though she was curious which one of us would speak first. It was him. "You've been here before, Ethan. You just don't like to remember it." I shook my head. "No, I've never..." "You have. And the last time, you made a deal." The girl's voice was quiet but sharp. "A promise." My pulse was pounding so hard I could barely hear myself think. "What promise?" The shadow me stepped closer until we were almost face to face. I could see the faint cracks in his skin, like porcelain that had been glued back together. His breath was cold on my cheek. "You promised to come back for her." Images slammed into my head again. Me as a teenager, holding the girl's hand as we ran through the forest. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I kept telling her we were almost there. Then, a door. The same attic door. I went through it. She didn't. I stumbled back. "No, I would never..." The girl stepped forward now, eyes glistening. "You closed it, Ethan. You left me here." Her voice cracked, and for the first time since I'd seen her, she looked less like a ghost and more like a person, someone who had waited too long for something that never came. I opened my mouth to speak, but the forest around us groaned, the sound like wood splitting under pressure. The shadow figures were moving now, circling closer. Shadow me spoke again. "Do you know what happens to people the house remembers?" I didn't answer. "It keeps them, over and over, until they keep their promises." The ground beneath my feet shuddered. The forest floor cracked, revealing a black void beneath. Some of the shadow figures stepped into it without hesitation, vanishing into the darkness. The girl reached out her hand. "It's not too late. You can still take me through the door." I looked back over my shoulder. The attic door was still there, standing alone among the trees. The iron key in my pocket felt heavier than ever, but my gut told me there was something wrong. Something about the way the shadow figures leaned in, watching, almost expectant. I took a step toward the girl, but Shadow Me blocked the way. "Think. Why would she want you to take her back through?" The girl's voice sharpened. "Because I don't belong here." Shadow Me tilted his head. "Neither do I, but that's not the same thing as being safe out there." I looked between them, my mind racing. "What are you saying?" He leaned in, whispering so low I almost didn't hear it. "Not everyone who's trapped here is a victim." The girl's expression changed for just a second, too quick to be sure, but I thought I saw the faintest smirk. And then the shadows surged forward. They didn't attack. They just closed in around me, their cold presence pressing against my skin until I could barely breathe. The girl reached through them, her hand inches from mine. "Ethan," she said softly, "I kept my promise. Now it's your turn." Something in her tone made my stomach twist. I pulled the iron key from my pocket. The spiral engraving seemed to pulse in the dim light. Shadow Me's voice cut through the air. "If you turn that key for her, you'll never leave the house." The shadows froze, as if waiting to see what I would do. I gripped the key tighter, my mind flashing with images, her smile, the photograph in the music box, the sound of her voice calling my name in the dead of night. I wanted to believe she was innocent. I wanted to believe I had abandoned her once, and this was my chance to make it right. But then another image surfaced. One I hadn't remembered until now. Her eyes, not warm and pleading like now, but cold, unblinking, as she whispered something to me the last time I was here. "Once you open it for me, it opens for all of us." I froze. "All of us?" The girl's smile widened ever so slightly. "Yes, all of us." Behind her, the shadow figures began to shift and sway, their movements faster, almost excited. The forest creaked and groaned as if straining against some invisible barrier. Shadow Me's voice was almost desperate now. "If you open it, the house won't just remember you. It will remember everyone." I looked at the girl. What are you really? Her smile didn't falter. I'm what you promised to free. And if I don't? Her voice dropped to a whisper that seemed to crawl inside my skull. Then you stay here, with me. Forever. The attic door behind me creaked open on its own, revealing the faint glow of the house beyond. I could smell the fireplace, hear the distant hum of the wind through the pines. I had two choices: take her hand and turn the key, or walk through alone and break the promise completely. Either way, I knew the house would remember what I chose. I stepped toward the door, the key trembling in my hand. Her eyes followed me, that faint smile never breaking. Just as I reached the threshold, I heard my own voice behind me. If you open it, you'll wish you'd never remembered. I turned. Shadowy was gone, and the girl was closer than she'd ever been. The key felt heavier than it should, like something inside it was pulling me toward the lock. The attic door loomed ahead, its wood swollen and dark, as if it had been soaked in something thicker than water. Beyond it, I could hear faint sounds: the creak of floorboards, the faint crackle of a fire, the ticking of a clock I didn't remember owning. The girl's bare feet made no sound as she stepped up beside me. "It's time," she said softly. Her breath fogged in the cold air, but mine didn't. I hesitated, glancing toward the forest. The shadow figures stood still now, watching in total silence, their heads tilted at unnatural angles. The air around them seemed to hum, low, constant, like the sound before a thunderstorm. Shadowy was nowhere to be seen. "You said if I open this for you, it opens for everyone," I said carefully. She smiled faintly. "That's the point." I gripped the key tighter. "Why would I want that?" "Because," she said, leaning closer, "you were one of us once, and you still are." Her words sent a shiver through me, though not from the cold. "I'm not like you." "You will be." I turned back to the door, heart hammering. The spiral symbol on the key seemed to move when I looked at it. Slow, hypnotic, like it was pulling my thoughts into its center. And then faintly, I heard another voice, behind me, low but urgent. "Don't do it." I spun around. Shadowy was back, his cracked face darker now, like pieces of him had been burned. "She's not trapped," he said. "She's the one keeping the door closed. You open it, and the house stops choosing. It takes everyone." The girl's eyes narrowed. "He's lying." Am I? Shadowy stepped closer to me, ignoring her. "Think about it. Why hasn't she left on her own? She's had the key before. Many times." The girl's smile vanished for the first time. "He's not supposed to be here this time." Something in her voice wasn't fear, it was annoyance. I stepped back from both of them. "This is insane. I don't even know who's telling the truth anymore." Shadowme's voice hardened. "The truth is, Ethan, you've opened this door before, and every time you do, you wake up back in the house with one less piece of yourself. That's why you don't remember." My stomach turned. If that's true, then why do I keep coming back? He glanced at the girl. "Because she makes you." The shadows in the forest stirred again, moving closer now. Some of them broke into a slow, deliberate walk toward the door. The girl stepped in front of me, her tone soft again. "Please, Ethan, just one turn of the key. You can end it for both of us." I stared at her, trying to read her expression. But it wasn't human anymore. Not fully. Her smile was just a little too perfect, her eyes just a little too still. The shadows were nearly at the door now, their faces shifting between strangers and versions of myself I didn't recognize. Some of them whispered my name in voices too deep to belong to anything alive. I tightened my grip on the key. The girl extended her hand, palm up. "It's your choice." Shadowy leaned in close. "But you'd better be sure." I stepped toward the door. Her eyes lit up. The shadows seemed to lean forward in anticipation. I raised the key toward the lock, and then stopped. "What happens?" I asked slowly, "if I turn it the other way?" Her smile faltered. "There is no other way," she said quickly, but Shadow Me's cracked grin widened. "There is. It doesn't open." He glanced at her, his voice dropping. "It closes." She stepped forward, but I kept my distance. "If I close it," I asked, "what happens to all of you?" Shadow Me answered first. "We stay here, forever, and so do you." Her voice overlapped his, harsher now. "You can't close what's already open." But she was lying. I could feel it. I took a deep breath, feeling the cold bite at my skin. I'm done making promises I don't understand. And with that, I shoved the key into the lock and turned it backwards. The reaction was instant. The forest roared, every tree shuddering, every shadow screaming in voices that weren't human. The girl's face twisted, her perfect features warping into something stretched and jagged. "You don't know what you've done!" she shrieked. The attic door slammed shut with a deafening crack. The spiral symbol on the key burned into my palm before fading away. Shadow Me stood still, watching her as the shadows around us were pulled backward, sucked into the cracks of the forest floor like water down a drain. Her voice grew distant, fading with them. "You'll come back, Ethan. You always do." And then she was gone. The next thing I knew, I was standing in the living room of my cousin's house. It was morning. Sunlight streamed through the windows. My bag was on the couch. My phone buzzed with a notification from an hour ago. Everything looked normal, except for one thing. When I checked my palm, the spiral mark from the key was still there, faint but warm to the touch. From upstairs, I heard it. Knock, 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 coming from the attic. The moment Ethan stepped into the kitchen, he knew something was wrong. It wasn't the dust or the faint smell of mold. It was the breathing. Slow, steady, coming from the walls themselves. "Mom," he called, his voice shaky. No answer. He turned toward the doorway to leave, but the door was gone. Not closed. Gone. A smooth wall of cracked paint stood where the doorway had been seconds ago. The kitchen seemed to stretch slightly, as if the walls inhaled. A faint whisper slithered into his ears. "You shouldn't have come back." His knees went weak. The table in the center of the room began to sink, slowly, into the floor like it was melting. Chairs followed. The black tiles rippled like liquid, swallowing everything in silence. Ethan backed up until his shoulders hit the cold wall. And then the wall pushed back. Something under the plaster shifted. It felt like a ribcage expanding. The house wasn't just old. It wasn't just haunted. It was alive. The whispers grew louder. "We remember you. We remember what you did." He pressed his palms against the wall, desperately searching for a way out, but the plaster felt warm, like skin. And then, a faint knock came from the other side. 3 slow, deliberate taps, from inside the wall. He froze. The voice returned, softer this time. "We never forgave you." And just before he could scream, the floor beneath him cracked open, revealing a staircase spiraling down into darkness. The air in the corridor was colder than any room they had been in before. Not just the kind of cold that makes your skin prickle, but the kind that seeps through bone and whispers to your nerves that you shouldn't be here. Maya's flashlight flickered again. The battery was draining faster than it should, but she didn't dare turn it off. Every time the light wavered, the shadows seemed to shift in ways shadows shouldn't, bending in the wrong direction, stretching toward them instead of away. "We've been walking in circles," Ryan muttered, his voice trembling as much from fear as from the freezing air. "I swear this hallway was behind the dining room when we came in. Now it's not," Maya finished, glancing over her shoulder. The hallway behind them had changed. Gone was the chipped floral wallpaper and dusty wainscoting. Instead, it was a sheer black void, pulsing faintly, as if it were breathing. They both froze. Something moved in that darkness. It wasn't footsteps. It wasn't even a shape they could clearly see. It was a sense. A presence that pressed against their minds, making them both stagger back as if an invisible hand had shoved them. "Keep going," Maya whispered. "Don't look at it." They turned and walked faster, but the cold followed, and the breathing in the dark was getting closer. The hallway ended at a door unlike any they'd seen before in the house. It was black, carved with intricate spirals and symbols that seemed to twist when you looked at them too long. There was no handle, no keyhole, just a single blood-red circle painted in the center. Ryan reached out instinctively, but Maya slapped his hand away. "Don't touch it," she hissed. "Why? It might be the way out." "It's not," Maya said, her voice distant, almost trance-like. "This door wasn't here before." Ryan frowned. "So? Neither was half the stuff we've seen tonight. What's your point?" Her eyes locked onto his. "This door is waiting." They both turned as the breathing behind them grew louder. The black void in the hallway was now only a few feet away, spilling shadows like ink on water. From within it, faint whispers rose, in a language neither could understand, but one that made their stomachs churn. "Ryan," Maya whispered, "it's going to reach us." Panic flared in his chest. They had no other choice. He grabbed Maya's wrist, pulled her forward, and slammed his palm against the red circle on the door. The circle glowed instantly. The carvings on the wood began to rotate, gears in a clockwork mechanism that shouldn't exist. The door cracked open with a low groan, and a thin line of red light spilled out. It wasn't the warm, comforting light of safety. It was the kind of light you'd see bleeding through your eyelids during a nightmare. Unnatural, too bright, too alive. Still, it was better than the thing in the dark. They pushed the door open and stumbled inside. At first, it looked like another room in the mansion, except it was pristine. No dust, no cobwebs, no sign of decay. The walls were lined with shelves full of strange objects, cracked porcelain dolls, jars of teeth, faded photographs of people whose eyes had been scratched out. In the center stood a single wooden chair, and sitting in the chair was Maya. She was older, maybe 40 or 50, her hair streaked with gray, her face pale and thin, but her eyes, they were exactly the same. Ryan froze. "What the hell?" The older Maya smiled faintly, though there was no joy in it. "You shouldn't have opened the door." Ryan's heart pounded. "Maya, who is that?" The older Maya's gaze shifted to him. "You should leave, now, before it notices you." A loud knock echoed behind them, but it wasn't the polite knock of a person. It was slow, heavy, and it made the shelves rattle. Ryan grabbed younger Maya's hand. "We're leaving." But older Maya shook her head. "There is no leaving, not anymore." The knock came again, louder, followed by the sound of claws dragging across wood. Ryan's voice cracked. "What's behind that door?" Older Maya's smile widened, and now it was wrong, stretching too far, her skin bending in unnatural ways. "The one who's been waiting for you." The lights in the room began to dim. The air turned heavy, pressing down on their chests. And from the door they had just entered, a voice whispered, not in words, but in pure intent, "Open me again." Younger Maya's flashlight died. The room plunged into near darkness, save for the faint pulsing glow of the red circle reappearing on the inside of the door. Older Maya stood slowly, her bones cracking like dry twigs. "You only get to choose once," she whispered, "and you already chose wrong." The knocking stopped. For a moment, silence. Then, the door began to open from the other side. Evelyn stood at the threshold of the decaying cabin, her hand trembling as she gripped the rusted doorknob. Behind her, the wind howled through hollow pines, carrying with it that same unsettling whisper she had heard since the first night. Inside, the cabin was a museum of neglect. Broken furniture, walls sagging with moisture, a fireplace choked with ash. And on the far wall, etched into the rotting wood, were the same cryptic symbols she had seen in the forest clearing. But something was different this time. The symbols were glowing, faintly, like embers. She approached cautiously, her boots crunching over splintered floorboards. The air smelled of damp earth and something sweet, something rotting. Her flashlight beam landed on a pile of photographs in the corner. They were all of her. Every picture was from different stages of her life. A blurry one from when she was 6, holding her first puppy. Another from her high school graduation. One from her first apartment. She never remembered anyone taking those pictures. She turned over the last photo and froze. It was taken yesterday. And in the background, just behind her shoulder, was the cabin. Her chest tightened. Someone had been watching her. A sudden thud came from upstairs. The kind that wasn't accidental. The kind that meant someone was moving. Evelyn's flashlight shook in her hands as she tilted it toward the staircase. The steps were so warped they looked like they might crumble if she set foot on them. Still, she climbed. Halfway up, she thought she heard breathing. Slow, deliberate, and close. But every time she stopped, it stopped too. The upstairs hallway was short, with only 2 doors. One was open, revealing a bedroom with a collapsed ceiling. The other was closed, but there was light flickering beneath it. Her instinct screamed to leave. Run. Don't look back. Instead, she reached for the doorknob. It was warm. She twisted it slowly, the hinges crying out as the door opened. Inside was a small room lit only by dozens of candles. On the floor, surrounded by a perfect circle of salt, was a wooden chair, and sitting in it was herself. Same face, same clothes, same wide, terrified eyes staring back at her. The other Evelyn opened her mouth and spoke in her voice, but the tone was wrong, too deep, too steady. "You shouldn't have come back." Evelyn staggered backward, but the door slammed shut behind her. The candles flared. The other Evelyn rose from the chair, the salt line breaking under her bare feet. And then the thing wearing her face smiled. "You've been in the wrong place, since the very beginning." The shadows on the walls twisted, stretching toward her like grasping hands. The air grew hot and heavy. Somewhere, far away, she thought she heard the first knock on the cabin door. One, slow, loud, then another. 2. The thing's grin widened as the third knock echoed through the room. 3. It leaned closer to her ear, its breath cold now, and whispered, "They're here." The door behind Evelyn exploded inward, and something massive stepped through. But before she could see it, every candle went out at once, plunging the cabin into pure darkness. The house had gone unnaturally silent after the screaming stopped. Not the kind of silence that comes from peace, but the kind that presses against your eardrums until you start hearing the thumping of your own heartbeat. Ethan stood in the hallway, his back pressed against the peeling wallpaper, his chest rising and falling in quick, sharp breaths. The lantern in his hand flickered, shadows twisting unnaturally across the warped floorboards. The smell of burnt wood and something foul lingered in the air, drifting down from the blackened staircase above. From upstairs came the faintest tap, 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 like someone's bare feet walking slowly toward the landing. His throat tightened. It wasn't possible. He'd seen her burn. Ethan clenched the lantern tighter and took a step toward the staircase. The first stair groaned under his weight, then another, then a whisper. So close to his ear it felt like breath against his skin. "You shouldn't have come back." He spun around, nearly dropping the lantern, but the hallway behind him was empty. Only the faded wallpaper with its water-stained patterns stared back. Ethan swallowed hard and continued up the stairs, the burnt wood crunching under his boots. Halfway up, the light in his lantern dimmed again, the shadows thickening into shapes that seemed almost human. The landing was worse. The air was thick, smoky, as though the fire from years ago had never truly died. Ethan coughed, waving a hand in front of his face. Through the haze, he saw it. A door at the end of the hall, slightly open, an amber glow spilling out from inside. He stepped forward. 1 step, 2. The smoke curled around him like living fingers. And then, he saw them. 2 glowing eyes, not human, not animal, fixed directly on him from inside the room. "Who's there?" Ethan's voice cracked. The eyes didn't blink. They just watched. And then, they started moving toward him. Slow, deliberate. Ethan froze, but the door behind him slammed shut with a deafening bang. The hallway stretched unnaturally, like the floor itself was pulling away from him. The smoke thickened, swallowing the walls, the ceiling, the floor. And then, from within the smoke, a hand reached out, thin, charred, with skin hanging in tatters. It grabbed his wrist with an inhuman grip, the nails digging into his flesh. Ethan screamed, dropping the lantern. The flame died instantly, plunging everything into complete darkness. And in that darkness, a voice spoke again. But this time, it wasn't a whisper. It was right in front of his face. "I remember you." The eyes flared bright red, and then rushed straight at him. Ethan gasps and throws his arms up to protect himself, but when the smoke clears for just a moment, he's no longer standing in the house. He's somewhere else entirely, somewhere underground, and someone, or something, is breathing right behind his neck. The candle's flame trembled in Ethan's hand as he pushed deeper into the house's last unexplored hallway. The walls here weren't like the rest. They were wet. Not damp. Wet. His fingers brushed the wallpaper, and they came away slick with a dark, tar-like moisture that smelled of soil and copper. Every step echoed differently now. It wasn't the hollow creak of wood. It was thick, muffled, like walking on something alive. Behind him, the hallway stretched longer than it should. He glanced over his shoulder and his stomach dropped. The door he had entered from was gone. He pressed forward, the candlelight flickering over warped door frames. One by one, the doors stood slightly ajar, as if waiting. Inside each, Ethan glimpsed moments, not objects, moments, flickering like looping film reels. The first room, a woman crying over a cradle, her face hidden in shadow, her sobs muffled as if underwater. The second, a man at a desk, scribbling frantically into a notebook until his knuckles split and bled onto the pages. The third, a boy standing in a corner, whispering to someone Ethan couldn't see. His voice was too soft, but Ethan caught one word: soon. Every figure froze when Ethan passed. Their heads didn't turn, they snapped. All at once, their faces jerked to look at him, pale eyes wide and unblinking. Ethan's breath hitched, his candlelight wavered, and when he looked forward again, there was only one door left. The last door was smaller than the rest, child-sized, and carved into its wood was a crude spiral, the same symbol he'd seen etched into the basement wall on his first night. His pulse thudded in his throat as he reached for the brass handle. It was warm, too warm, like it had been held by another hand seconds before. The door opened without a sound. Inside, the room was empty except for a single chair, and in that chair sat Ethan. His own face stared back at him, gaunt, eyes sunken, skin pale as paper. The other Ethan's lips curved into a smile that wasn't his. "You made it," the double said softly. "Took you long enough." Ethan stepped back. "What is this?" "Who?" "You," the figure interrupted. "Me, us. The house doesn't keep people. It makes them, rewrites them. Every step you took, every sound you heard. It was carving you into what you need to be." Ethan's mind reeled. What I need to be for what? The other Ethan leaned forward, shadows stretching unnaturally across the floor. To take my place. Before Ethan could move, the door slammed shut behind him. The walls groaned. The floor pulsed under his feet. Something was pressing in. Not from the outside, but from inside his skull. Memories that weren't his flooded in, standing in the attic decades ago, watching strangers enter the house, whispering in their ears while they slept. guiding them step by step to this same small door. The other Ethan rose from the chair, his movements jerky, puppet-like. His voice deepened, layered with dozens of others. Someone has to be the voice of the house. Someone has to keep calling them in. Ethan backed against the wall, heart hammering. I'm not staying here. The double smiled wider. You already are. The walls began to shift, the wood grain twisting into screaming faces. The ceiling stretched upward into darkness. The air thickened until it felt like syrup in his lungs. Ethan lunged for the door, but it wasn't there anymore. Only more wall, slick with that same black tar. The other Ethan stepped closer, his features warping into every face Ethan had seen in the looping rooms. You'll forget who you were. You'll remember who you are, Ethan screamed, and his candle went out. When his eyes adjusted to the dark, he was sitting in the chair. The room was empty. No double. No door. Only the faint sound of footsteps in the hallway. Slow. Careful. Approaching. He tried to stand, but his body wouldn't move. His hands were gripping the armrests like they'd been carved from the same wood. The footsteps stopped just outside the wall. A shadow passed over the spiral carving. A voice, his own voice, whispered through the door. Come in. Ethan became part of the house just like those before him. It's both psychological, was he manipulated into madness, and supernatural. The house truly rewrites people. The cycle continues. The next victim is already outside the door.